Okay, so Dr. Lynne McNeill is an assistant professor of folklore in the English department at Utah State. Her research interests include legend, belief, fandom, and digital culture. She serves on the boards of the Western States Folklore Society and the International Society for Contemporary Legend Research, and she is the reviews editor for the Journal of Contemporary Legend. She has made several appearances on national TV and radio, and she is the author of the popular textbook, Folklore Rules. And maybe some of you even study from that textbook. Her work has been published in Western Folklore, Contemporary Legend, and other journals and edited collections. And she is currently working on a book project, Real Virtuality, Serial Collaboration in the Small World View. And I know we're going to love this, and if I run out, it's not because I don't like what she's saying, it's because I'm internalizing it too much.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Can you all hear me successfully? Give me 1 second to get this additional.
That works for you.
Oh yeah, no, I didn't give you the projecting one. I'm sorry, Anne. I only gave you the recording one.
Okay, it's what my children always do.
All right. Excellent, excellent. Thank you. Before I begin, I do, just for those of you who are not in a folklore class or who do not know that we have an amazing folklore program here at Utah State University, we do. It is worth checking out. It's worth taking a folklore class, even if that's not your major or your minor. We offer a minor in folklore studies as well. It's only 5 classes, and they all fulfill a bunch of other gen ed requirements, so it's a handy way to earn a minor. We also have the Fife Folklore Archives here on campus. It's right in this building in the basement. If you have not yet had a chance to visit there, I encourage you to get down there, check it out. You can find, among other things, old Ephraim's skull, the giant grizzly bear that terrorized Cache Valley so long ago. His skull is here on display if you want to check it out. So let us begin discussing Slender Man. I'm going to try and leave lots of time at the end for questions, so if you have questions as we're going, keep them in your mind so that we can talk about them afterwards. On May 31st, 2014 in Waukesha, Wisconsin, 12-year-olds Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire lured their friend Peyton Lautner into the woods, stabbed her 19 times, and left her to die. It's Halloween, we're starting dark. Lautner managed to make her way out of the forest where she was rescued by a passerby and taken to the hospital. When the 2 girls were asked why they had stabbed their friend, they claimed to have committed the crime to please a creature known as Slender Man, to become his proxies or servants, and to protect their families from the demon's wrath. This incident was the first time that many people had heard of Slender Man, and it was an unfortunate introduction. Who is Slender Man? How did these young girls learn about him, and why did they attribute their horrific attack to his instructions? The race to discover the truth behind Slender Man was on, but it was complicated by a number of factors. The question of belief in Slender Man is twofold. We can ask, is he real? As my 11-year-old cousins recently asked me. And we can ask, is he a real legend? As my college students often ask me. And we've had cause to ask these kinds of questions before when art has mimicked life a little bit too well. The War of the Worlds radio program is one example. The Blair Witch Project, one of the first major found footage films. And, I don't know if any of you have seen it, but the Discovery Channel's expose on mermaids, that one caused a big to-do. All fictional productions that led people to question what is real and what isn't. But unlike those programs, Slender Man is folkloric, which means that the answers to questions of belief are significantly muddied by the emergent and discursive nature of legends on the internet. In 2009, 5 years before the Waukesha stabbing, this photo hit the web. If you can't read the caption, it says, "One of 2 recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze, notable for being taken the day which 14 children vanished and for what is referred to as the Slender Man. Deformities cited as film defects by officials. Fire at library occurred 1 week later. Actual photograph confiscated as evidence. 1986, photographer Mary Thomas, missing since June 13th, 1986. So the image depicted here isn't scary or shocking as much as it's uncanny. It can take a moment to even realize there's something strange being depicted. That would be there, if you can't spot it. If you want to zoom in a little bit, this is what is in the background of this image. The caption, referencing events and explanations that sound both troublesome and plausible, a fire, a disappearance of children, a missing photographer, add to the unsettling nature of this photo. This photo was first posted with another. Both of the images depict children in the foreground and a tall, slim figure in the background. The blurry creature appears to be male, given its height and apparel, a plain black suit, although its features are largely indiscernible. In the first photo, there is a suggestion of tentacles emerging from its body, what the caption, in a perfect mimicry of official statements on disturbing events, attribute to film distortion. In the other photo, this photo, the children are clearly upset and frightened, and the accompanying caption, "We didn't want to go, we didn't want to kill them, but its persistent silence and outstretched arms horrified and comforted us at the same time," implies that they have fallen prey to the mysterious and faceless character behind them. These two images were posted on June 10th, 2009 to the Something Awful web forum by a user named Victor Surge. His real name was Eric Knudsen, in response to a thread asking users to create a paranormal image. This was the birth of Slender Man. Now, this is all easily discoverable information online. Numerous news stories have documented it. Knudsen even made a public statement when the Waukesha stabbing occurred, sharing his sorrow and his condolences. But despite this, Slender Man's origins are consistently being called into question. Online, the emic genre that Slender Man is included in is creepypasta. Creepypasta is defined as horror-related legends or images that have been copied and pasted to different sites on the internet. And the etymology is really straightforward. So the word creepypasta comes to us from the non-horror material that is regularly copied and pasted online, which gives us the term, I'm sure you can see how, copypasta. The phrase copy-paste looks a lot like copypasta. And if copypasta is creepy, it's called creepypasta. That is how we get this terminology here. So now creepypasta, as content online, is wonderfully folkloric in that it's crowdsourced. Anyone who wants to can take up the charge and try their hand at adding to the mythos of a particular story or character. Just as with urban legends, or contemporary legends, as folklorists prefer to call them, creepypasta is open to being shared and adapted by anyone. And there is a lot of great creepypasta out in the world. The best content tends to become the most prominent, as happens regularly online, and a quick search of either the creepypasta wiki or of the No Sleep Reddit will give you nightmare fodder for years. How many of you are fans of reading creepypasta? Oh, we have a minority here. I encourage you guys, it's Halloween, get on Reddit, find the No Sleep Reddit, see what there is to see. Stories like, for example, Candle Cove. These are all very famous creepypastas. Candle Cove recently got its own television show. Sci-Fi Network's Channel Zero did Candle Cove for their first season. I believe they're doing the creepypasta No End House for their second season. It's a creepypasta written as a web forum discussion about a children's television program. The Russian Sleep Experiment, another classic piece of creepypasta that appears to tell discovered files of experiments that the Russians ran a long time ago with depriving people of sleep and the things that happened as a result of that. The story of Ben Drowned, this is in the subgenre of creepypasta of hacked haunted video games, which is very exciting. Jeff the Killer. Yeah, I hate this slide. I'm glad my back is to it. When it shows up in my online class forums, I have to scroll really, really quickly to get past it. So I'm just going to leave it up there for a little while. And there's endless more. I mean, this is barely even scratching the surface of creepypasta. There's stories, there's videos, there's images, there are even actual games that you can play. Now, not all creepypasta is good, obviously, just as not every telling of a legend is successfully spooky. And there's even a name for bad creepypasta. Can you guess it? Crappypasta. Yes, exactly. One classic example of crappypasta is a story known colloquially as man-door, hand-hook, car door. I like the people who are nodding at that one. Man-door, hand-hook, car door is a terrible retelling of the infamous hook hand urban legend, combined with the legend known as the boyfriend's death. I'm not going to try and read this to you because it's really long and I'm not sure how clear it is, but it is obviously a really terrible telling of these two legends combined. And the last line where we sort of hit the climax of the legend. If you're familiar with the hook-handed legend, it's when the couple comes back from Lover's Lane after being tormented by frightening noises to find a hook hanging from the car door, and that's where we get our line, man door, hand hook, car door. So this is terrible, obviously, but it highlights for us what makes a good creepypasta. The existence of crappypasta tells us what makes something good. It has to be new, or new-ish at least. Anything too familiar as a classic scary story won't pass the actual possibility test. It must also be well written, but that doesn't mean that it has to have good grammar and good spelling. Good creepypasta needs to suit its medium. A realistic web forum post will have a certain type of informality to the writing and different voices and styles for each of its contributors. Chris Straub, the creator of the Candle Cove creepypasta, did an excellent job at this. A believable blog post will have certain stylistic elements as well as different tones for the comments and replies to distinguish it from the original post. A realistic found photograph will be suitably detailed yet enigmatically decontextualized. And of course, it has to be scary. The Slender Man mythos achieves all of this. As a frightening figure, he has struck a major nerve, and the internet has exploded with additions to his story. Shortly after the original images of Slender Man were shared, anyone seeking Slender Man's origins in a web search would have found this. Purportedly a 16th century woodcut showing an early precursor to Slender Man. And if you can see, he has at least 3 legs and his arm is growing into a spear that is piercing the knight that he's fighting. Or this, an image claiming to come from the Sierra del Capivara National Park in Brazil, dating back to 900 BC. Or you could have found stories of the Tall Man or Der Grossmann online, an old Romanian or German fairy tale that seems to tell the story of a Slender Man-like figure. In one version, claiming to be a translation that the teller heard as a child, we can see the features of traditional fairy tales being used to suggest a precursor to the contemporary figure. Once upon a time, there were twin girls, Stella and Zorina. They were brave little girls and had no fear of the dark, nor of spiders and other crawling things. Where other young ladies, and even young boys, would cower, Stella and Zorina would walk with their heads high. They were good girls, obedient to their mother and father, and to the word of God. They were the best children a mother could ask for, and this was their undoing. One day, Stella and Zorina were out with their mother gathering berries from the forest. Their mother bid them stay close, and they listened, as they were good children. The day was bright and clear, and even as they walked closer to the center of the forest, the light barely dimmed. It was nearly bright as noon when they found the Tall Man. The Tall Man stood in a clearing, dressed as a nobleman, all in black. Shadows lay over him, dark as a cloudy midnight. He had many arms, all long and boneless as snakes, all sharp as swords, writhing like worms on nails. He did not speak, but made his intentions known. Their mother tried not to listen, but she could no more disobey the Tall Man than she could forget how to breathe. She walked into the clearing, her daughters behind her. "Stella," she said, "take my knife and cut a circle on the ground big enough to lie in." Stella, who was not afraid of the Tall Man, nor afraid of the quiver in her mother's voice, obeyed. "Zorina," the mother said, "take the berries and spread them in the circle, and crush them underfoot until the juice stains the earth." Though Zorina wondered why her mother asked her to do such a thing, she obeyed, because she was a good girl. Stella, their mother said, lie in the circle. Stella, though she worried she might stain her clothes, did as her mother asked. Zorina, the mother said, and bid Zorina cut her sister open with the knife. Zorina could not. Please, her mother said, if you don't, it will be worse. It will be so much worse. But Zorina could not, and she threw the knife away and ran home crying. She hid under her bed, afraid for the first time in her life. She waited until her father came home from the fields and told him of the terrible thing she had seen in the woods. Her father comforted her and told her she would be safe. He went out into the woods, his axe in hand, and as he commanded, she stayed by the hearth waiting for his return. After some time, she fell asleep, and when she woke, it was to the sound of knocking on the door at the darkest hour of the night. Who is there? She asked. It is your father, the knocker said. I don't believe you, said Zorina. It is your sister, the knocker said. It cannot be, said Zorina. It is your mother, said the knocker, and I told you it would be worse. And the door, locked tight before her father left, fell open as if it had been left ajar, and her mother stepped in, her sister's head in one hand, her father's in the other. Why? Cried Zorina. Because, said her mother, there is no reward for goodness, no respite for faith. There is nothing but cold steel teeth and scourging fire for us all, and it has come for you now. And the tall man slid from the fire and clenched Zorina in his burning embrace. And that was the end of her. Other stories are a little bit less detailed than that. A supposed translation from an account in Germany in 1702 describes an alleged incident involving Der Grossmann. My child, my Lars, he is gone, taken from his bed. The only thing we have found is a scrap of black clothing. It feels like cotton, but is softer. Lars came into my bedroom yesterday, screaming that the angel is outside. I asked him what he was talking about, and he told me a fairy story about Der Grossmann. He said he went into the grove by our village and found one of my cows dead, hanging from a tree. I thought nothing of it, but now he is gone, and we must find him, and my family must leave before we are killed. I'm sorry, my son. I should have listened. May God forgive me. So these stories are not real fairy tales, at least not fairy tales from antiquity. And the woodcuts are not real woodcuts, though man, do they look good, don't they? Can do a lot of good stuff with Photoshop. And the cave paintings, of course, are not real cave paintings. These are all Photoshopped images, all created after June 2009, when Slender Man first appeared. But they perfectly capture the legend genre's identifying features of possibility. Legends as a genre are what we use to negotiate our perception of what is possible in the world. They feature the strange, the miraculous, or the just plain unlikely, but they take place in the real world, and when they're told, they seem that they could perhaps be true. This is, of course, the opposite of fairy tales, right, where we suspend disbelief when we hear a fairy tale. With legends, there's a chance that this could be actually real. If a legend is told too artfully, too obviously crafted and practiced, it reads like fiction and it fails. It's a good story, but it doesn't give us that sense of possibility. It's the partial, the incomplete, the random details and missing dates or specific names against the blank swath of missing information. That's what real mysteries look like. And when creepypasta can capture that successfully, it works very, very well. The creation of all of these images and stories, and there are so many more than the ones that I am sharing with you, are part of a process that one folklorist, Jeff Tolbert, has called reverse ostension. Ostension is a folkloristic concept, meaning a concept that comes to us from the field of folklore studies, that describes the process by which we act out or embody our legends. This is one reason why legends are so cool. I'm not biased at all by being a legend scholar, I promise. We don't just tell legends, we live legends. A pre-existing narrative can dictate not just what we say, but what we do. We might, for example, visit the weeping woman on our cemetery, on campus here, to see if she'll cry at midnight, or under the full moon, or tonight on Halloween. Or we might examine our children's trick-or-treat bags to see if any of the candy has been tampered with in any way, because we've heard stories about razor blades and drugs and poison in candy. Or two very disturbed young girls might take the stories of Slender Man's interest in violence towards children and attack their friend in the woods. All of these are examples of ostension. These are all ways that we act collectively in response to the narratives in our lives. With Slender Man, as Tolbert tells us, the reverse is happening. Collective action is becoming a narrative. Perhaps one of the reasons that Slender Man feels so plausible is because there are a number of precedents from both folk tradition and popular culture that he resembles in dress, in form, and in intent. In intent, we have the Pied Piper. That second photograph of Slender Man, the one of the two that Victor Surge posted, we have almost this exact depiction, someone leading children away, minus the happy music, I imagine. We have the Men in Black, who before they were a movie franchise were an actual folkloric manifestation in legends of UFOs, the people who showed up in suits and ties, all looking generally the same and innocuous at your door if you had seen too much to either wipe out your memory or to take you away. Pop culture gives us the Silence from Doctor Who, the Observers from Fringe, the Gentlemen from Buffy. You start to see a connection here, right? We have complicated feelings about men in suits. Even our beloved Jack Skellington fits this mold, right? These are all characters who set the stage for us to see Slender Man as a plausible character. But because Slender Man exists in the realm of creepypasta, he's more malleable, more amorphous, more open to our adjustment, and therefore better able to symbolize whatever it is that we want him to, instead of what a particular television or film producer or director or writer wants us to see in this. Although stories and images often place Slender Man within the woods or the wilderness, often the German Black Forest as a nod to traditional folktales, his refined and bureaucratic appearance highlights his uncanniness and distinguishes him from other humanoid monsters of the wilderness, creatures like Bigfoot or the shaggy wild men. Slender Man's calm and tidy appearance provides a counterpoint to the menace that he projects. In many ways, Slender Man's external appearance displays markers that contemporary society would suggest are evidence of someone trustworthy and capable: corporate, genteel, composed. And yet the uncanny elements, his lack of distinguishable features, his arms that are too long or too many, eat away at those comforting indices, reminding us that faceless, emotionless corporate powers rarely have our best interests at heart. They are lying in wait to grasp us in their many tentacles. Some scholars have suggested that Slender Man represents surveillance culture, the invasive presence of political and commercial interests in our lives, observing our internet browsing, our shopping, our reading, our viewing, our talking, placing cookies on our computers to track our habits, and then presenting us with increasingly targeted advertisements that are as insidious as they are accurate to our tastes. The fact that Slender Man is often believed to target children and adolescents provides a strong commentary on the contradictory ways that young people are forced to perceive adults and institutions today as caring, capable, and authoritative, but also as a faceless, unified power, potentially manipulative and dangerous. Folklorist Andrea Kita has compared the reported symptoms of slender sickness, a condition that arises when Slender Man is nearby, to the psychological symptoms of being bullied, and found an impressive overlap. Some depictions of Slender Man even cast him as a helpful or caring figure, ready to help out troubled kids. He has gained a daughter in his mythos, Skinny Sally, and they are often depicted having a loving and caring relationship. Young people are able to express their own concerns and anxieties through the mythos of Slender Man, just as adults get to tweak him to match theirs. So, is Slender Man a real legend? Well, he is now. He didn't start that way, though, and he definitely didn't begin in antiquity, no matter what the internet tells you. June 10th, 2009 is his birthday, and anything you find to the contrary is simply evidence that creepypasta is alive and well. But is Slender Man real? That's a different question altogether. The most obvious answer is no. He was the artful invention of one Eric Knudsen, going by the name Victor Surge, based on multiple familiar examples from history and popular culture. But some fans of Slender Man have pointed to the notion of the tulpa effect. This is the idea that collective thought generates reality. In other words, if enough people believe in Slender Man, he becomes real. The other main creature that the tulpa effect has been tied to is Cthulhu, for those of you who are fans of H.P. Lovecraft. We know that he invented Cthulhu, but many people have claimed that the tulpa effect is at work and Cthulhu now exists. So there is so much more that I could tell you about Slender Man, and I hope you find time in this Halloween season to explore online to learn more about him. Not all of it is scary, for those of you who are not into being scared. Slender Man has an entire family now, not just Sally, his daughter, but we have Splendor Man, who is as happy as he looks, Trender Man, who actually grew out of a very well-timed snapshot of someone passing by a mannequin with its blank face in a department store, and Offender Man, who's out there committing crimes in his trench coat. And he does emerge, as we said, as a heroic figure, occasionally in fan fiction. Slender Man has his entire own subgenre of fan fiction, where he is often depicted helping children fight back against their bullies. If those bullies end up with somewhat worse consequences than detention, say being eternally tormented by a legendary creature, just remember that it's not real. Or is it? Thank you. We have plenty of time for questions, and I'm hoping that you guys have lots and lots of questions. There is much to be said about Slender Man, and I want to know what it is that you guys want to know about him, about creepypasta in general, or anything relating to legends online or offline. I'm here for you.
Lynne, what's the deal with his tentacles? Like, where do they come out of? Do they do stuff? What is that?
This is a good question. So you can see the original Slender Man image. In one of them, he had no tentacles. And in the other one, there was that sort of film distortion suggestion of them. So that was a trope that we can see very clearly was one that people wanted. Almost every single iteration of Slender Man after the original two images includes the tentacles. The way that most people depict it, they emerge from his back, but they're not as much a part of his body as they are sort of, we might say in ghost-busting terms, ectoplasmic manifestations. Be a folklorist, guys, you get to say stuff like that. And he uses them largely to grab people. He is often seen reaching out with them. It makes for a lot of really fantastic fan art. If you do a Google search of Slender Man images, you will find amazing depictions of this. But yeah, it's one of those agreed upon elements that I think lends that air that he is not simply standing menacingly, he is reaching for us. Yeah? Brad?
Do you think that Victor Surge, or whatever his name was, intended for this to take off when he made that post? Like, do you think he studied and made sure it lined up with the tall man legend?
No, there is no tall man legend. Remember, I know. It's confusing, right? There is no tall man legend. That's how convincing these things are. There was no precursor to this. That was all retrofitted. But I don't think so. No, I think he is a really good Photoshopper who wanted to create a really good Paranormal Image as his web forum on the Something Awful forums, which at the time were behind a paywall. So we now have access to all of this, but before, when it was first created, it was a specific audience. So it was kept in the shadows a little bit by people working on refining this mythos before it really hit and became public. The video games, if any of you have played, there are 2 video games now about Slender Man where you are first-person narrative running through a forest searching for pages. And if Slender Man catches you before you get them all, you die. It's wonderfully creepy. But no, I don't think study went into this. I think a lot of really good skill and instinct went into this. And then a lot of other people in that crowdsourcing way came in and joined in with it. Nick?
I've actually created more games. You can find like spin-off ones where it's like Slenderman and SpongeBob or Slenderman and Christmas Town or something.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, and that's a nice example of sort of how it works when something is folkloric instead of, institutionalized through copyright and popular culture, which, to be fair, there is an effort to do. I believe that Eric Knudsen does actually now own the copyright to Slender Man. And there's a series of online YouTube videos called Marble Hornets that if you haven't watched them, you should definitely watch. They're excellent and good and creepy and give us a lot of the other predominant tropes of Slender Man that we didn't have time to talk about today, like his disruption of electrical equipment. A lot of people who are filming when Slender Man comes near, they'll start getting static and snow on the screen and things like that, and that comes to us courtesy of Marble Hornets as a production. But yeah, this is an excellent example. We can, with folklore, we can throw anything at the wall and see what sticks, because all of us get to jump in and pick up where someone else left off and reiterate something or adapt something or make it better or make it more interesting. So all the things that have been added to Slender Man that didn't really work, they've disappeared. All the things that really work, that really speak to us, those are the things that stick. So the way that we have Slender Man emerging now tells us that these are the elements of this tradition that people really wanted, that people were really interested in. Which is amazing to see how similar it is to the original. I mean, he was on to something. Yeah?
I'm curious, geographic range here, both in his mythos and then popularity. Is this mostly Americans, or is this caught on in other parts of the world? And where did the stories generally place? So you mentioned the Black Forest.
Yeah. So it's pretty darn global at this point, but it was an English-speaking web forum with what is generally presumed to be mostly American participants, though that's largely a guess. People have not done demographic studies of that original web forum where he came from. Victor Surge, or Eric Knudsen, is American. And a lot of the setting of it in exotic places is to match up with contemporary Americans' idea of where our folklore of antiquity comes from. So Romanians are not necessarily telling the story, Germans are not necessarily telling the story. It's Americans for the most part, or Westerners at least, putting these things into these other places where we believe our scary people come from. So the Black Forest in Germany and stuff like that. So those geographic things are a very artful depiction of the mythos. As far as who knows about Slender Man or where he is, you can find websites in all languages. I've reviewed websites in Spanish, Portuguese, various dialects of Chinese, including several Russian websites as well. So everyone's talking about Slender Man. Yeah, Ben?
So you mentioned Cthulhu and that it's being affected by the Polka effect.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what Cthulhu is.
Ah.
I know who Lovecraft is, and how has he been affected by the Polka?
So occasionally we get a type of literature. The works of H.P. Lovecraft are certainly one of them, but there's many others that are so good at world building that we just head out and run with that world. So these are the franchises that we see creating the most fan fiction and the most fan art and the most actively engaged reception from their audiences. I mean, we think often of being a fan as being a passive activity. Someone creates something and we receive it, right? And that is not at all. How many of you would identify as a fan of something actively? Oh, good, a number of you, cool. Then you know that you aren't simply just receiving it. You are taking that content and then going back out in the world and doing stuff with it. You are writing stories about it, playing games with it, talking to your friends about it, incorporating it into your folk speech. My husband and I communicate now largely in television quotes, and that works well for us. And that is a natural outgrowth of fandom these days. And H.P. Lovecraft's creature Cthulhu, who is this sort of tentacled octopus-like creature of, the underworld, is one of those things that he designed the book, the Necronomicon, which does not actually exist. It's a fake book. If you look online, it exists. People have retrofitted it the way the story of the Tall Man exists. It exists online, so people have made it real in a sense, and then other people have adapted it where one person's work fails, the other people will step in and bolster it. This actually is a principle in the study of folklore called the law of self-correction, that folklore is self-correcting inherently. It's the same principle that Wikipedia operates on, that when something is crowdsourced, mistakes will slowly even out so that something becomes the best representation of itself that it can be. Factually, we hope, on the Wikipedia side, though we know that's always dicey, but symbolically, on the folklore side, something is going to become the best symbol for the most people through this process of shared adaptation and evolution. So people have taken ideas like Cthulhu and the Necronomicon and run with them, made them real online, formed role-playing games around them, formed pseudo-religious groups around them and things like this. And when we take into account that idea of the tulpa, that a thought form can manifest physically in the world, once there's so many people who assume now that H.P. Lovecraft was writing about an actual mythological creature named Cthulhu, the idea would be that he has been thought into existence. I know, it's cool. Hayden?
Do we believe that Slender Man, like the mythos, is related to other tentacled creatures like Dr. Octopus or other characters?
Interesting. I don't know. I've not seen any connections like that. The majority of the connections that Slender Man faces, at least in people's discussions of him online, are other suit-wearing, creepy, bald guys. So it seems to be his head and his suit that connect him more broadly to a larger tradition than the tentacles, which is interesting because his tentacles are quite prominent. So, yeah.
So the first picture that you showed, with like the original Slenderman picture with all the kids in
Yeah.
front at the playground and they said they all disappeared, is that a true story? Like, did that
Nope.
happen?
Nope, but isn't it so well done? Let me just get that back, because this is really, understanding the artfulness that, goes into this. Let's see. Aha, okay, there we are. So one of the things when we talk about legends that are successful is when they achieve the right level of detail. So this is something that my students will recognize, right? We see authenticating features in legends, things that make them look real. When we're telling a story, we do that in a variety of number of ways. We use specific names and dates and places and stuff like this, but visually, this seal in the upper right-hand corner, City of Sterling Library's local studies collection. What inspired him to stick that on there? And yet it ups the believability of this photograph as a legitimate piece of an institution's collection so significantly. And the spottiness of this, one of two recovered photographs from the Sterling City Library blaze. How many of you had ever heard of the Sterling City Library blaze? That's because it didn't happen, right? But this first sentence makes us think it did. And this is the insidiousness of legends, and this ties to like way more topics that we might want to get into, things like fake news and things like that. Reading one headline about something implies that it is real. And we don't need, none of us are going to go, if we see this online, we're not going to be like, I'm going to start researching that Sterling City Library blaze. No. It just falls into the back of our minds as a thing that actually happened, and we sort of run with it. And the details, like Mary Thomas, missing since June 13th. 1986, that's so specific. She must be real, right? Not real. Nope, totally not a real person. And this is really, it's one thing to think of legends in sort of the literary sense, where we have a good creepy story written by a famous author who's known for spooking us. That's great. But real legends are like this. They're like gritty and incomplete and confusing and make us think like, wait, did that actually happen? Because it feels like it did. And that's really, if there's an art to what Erik Knudsen created, it's that perfect ability to capture how incomplete reality is when it communicates something to us. Anne?
So on the History Channel, if we move out from Slender Man and if we compare the pattern of that with the pattern of the History Channel Revelations, are there comparisons? And are they in the same fairly broad basket?
Are there comparisons to Slender Man? Absolutely, yes. I mean, so in folkloristic classification, we would call him a frightening figure, which is actually a term that folklorists have written articles about. John Whittowson, the folklorist, wrote about frightening figures in American and British culture for a really long time, and he identified any number of them, things like boogeymans and all the boogeymen. Not sure what the plural on that is. But you know, the boogeyman figure, the creatures that keep children inside at night, all of the creatures who are sort of focused on keeping children in line, keeping children behaving. There's any number of comparisons that can be made on that front, absolutely. And that's where we sort of see that continuity of intent. So we have continuity of appearance, which is fairly contemporary, but that continuity of intent goes back way, way, way farther. And we can see, and it's neat, Whittowson classifies frightening figures into all, like, you know, non-human frightening figures, human-like, but, you know, perhaps uncanny frightening figures, and then human frightening figures, which include school teachers and priests, as traditional figures of keeping children in line, right? So we can see animalistic things like, you know, wild animals, scary dogs, wolves, creatures like that, sort of this middle ground of aliens or, you know, skeletons, ghosts, apparitions, things that appear like humans but maybe aren't human, and then just straight up humans who also keep us in line. And Slender Man falls, I think, somewhere between those latter two categories. I like to think, you know, he's not a known, it's not like, you know, Father John, your local priest, obviously. But it's also, you know, he does have sort of this person-like character who frightens us and keeps us in line, perhaps. Yeah?
Ever been any explanation of what his motivation is for any of it? Like, he makes people do these horrible things.
Yeah.
That they made me kill he made me do this. There was a mom that chopped off her husband's head. And
Yeah.
like, is there a reason, or does he just
Like that. Is there a reason? No, there's no really coherent reason that is overall, sort of in the way that there's really no coherent reason why, like, the boogeyman might get your kid if they get out of bed for a drink of water at 2 a.m. You know, why? I don't know. And there's actually the term for this in folklore studies is internal logic. A lot of folklore just operates on its own. The minute you step outside of it, you're like, why did they do that? And the answer is like, no one would ever do that. And then you sort of go, well, like, in the confines of the story, we don't ask why. It just operates that way. Which also adds to making it frightening, right? We in Western supernatural narratives adore poignantly motivated ghosts, right? And most ghosts in Western tradition are totally logically motivated, and it scares us until we figure out their motivation. So there's this long-standing tradition of boundary stone ghosts. This is one of the most common types of ghosts that we find in a lot of traditional literature from Western Europe, which is that someone is out at night, past dark, not a good plan, you know, out in the back 40 or something, and they see this horrific apparition or hear these horrible noises, and there's this figure, and it's floating, you know, in between their property and their neighbors. So of course they run inside and shut the door and throw salt on it and cross themselves and all the things we know you do if ghosts are following you home. Good advice. And what it turns out often is that some neighbor long ago had moved the boundary stones between their two properties to gain more land, and of course now is condemned and tormented to be in limbo forever until the boundary stones get moved back. So what you have to do is put up with this haunting for a little bit longer, go out there, move all the stones back, and let that soul go to rest. That is a wonderful logical haunting. And we see this in tons of Western horror movies, right? I mean, Poltergeist, it was just like, oh, this is what's wrong, you know. What's that one I can't think of? You guys know, with George C. Scott and the wheelchair. The Changeling. That's it. That's another really good one, where it's just like, find out what the ghost wants, problem solved. But the ones that we are least comfortable with are the ones with motivation that we cannot divine. This is what stresses us out the most, and we're definitely leaning that way. The appeal of a lot of Japanese horror to American audiences is because there's just this horrible randomness to it. You walked into that apartment the day the ghost was there. Whoops. Things that you can't, with any amount of planning, actually avoid. And that's much, much more frightening. And as all legends do, tells us something about what we're stressed out about right now, that all of our planning isn't going to be good enough when whatever it is happens.
I'm just thinking of like motivating behavior. Like some of it, like you're saying, if you figure out what the ghost wants, but it might actually be figuring out what the teller wants of the recipient of the story.
You should be a folklorist. Yeah. Absolutely, yes. And we can see that fairly often. And it's one of the things that folklorists understand about stories that say we can never just give one interpretation of a story, because that story told in different contexts by different tellers will have different meanings because of that difference in motivation, right? So we can see on sort of a broad scale stories about everything. I'm sure you guys have heard babysitter legends, stories of people, it's a young girl babysitting for the first time, and whatever it is, everything that could go wrong goes as wrong as possible. This is the calls coming from inside the house, the scary clown statue, humans can lick too, the legend that frightened the pants off of me as a child. Are you all familiar with this story? Oh my gosh. So this short version. Girl is alone babysitting for the first time overnight. She's really stressed out. She just gets, like, as we all have experienced those spooky feelings, closing the blinds, so, whatever. She decides that she's gonna go to sleep, and she's gonna go to sleep in her parents' bed, her brother and sister upstairs in their room sleeping, and she's lying in bed and she can't fall asleep because she's super freaked out. So she reaches down and her dog is lying, on the floor by the bed, and she reaches down and pets the dog, and the dog licks her hand, and she's like, it's gonna be okay, it's all right, mom and dad are gonna be home. I've given it away by telling you the title of the legend, I know. And then later on, she gets up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom or get a drink of water or something, and she hears this dripping noise from the shower, and so she opens the shower door, and there's the dog, mangled and dead and hanging from the shower head, dripping blood. And written on the inside of the shower in blood is "humans can lick too." And of course, then she finds her brother and sister murdered, and it's all terrible. Anyways, who tells these stories? Yada, 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 everyone dies. So who tells these stories, right? It is almost always adolescent young women or young adult women. And it's women who are on the verge of being responsible for a household, right? We can see in there this really clear articulation of being the responsible decision maker, being a homeowner, being a parent, being in charge, being the one who has to deal with whatever it is that comes up, and just everything going unbelievably wrong. Now, young girls could sit around and have really pragmatic conversations with each other about that, or they can share these legends and articulate the same ideas sort of symbolically and get feedback from their friends. And who knows what that feedback will be? You tell that story to some of your friends, and your friends are like, yeah, no, I've heard like 9 versions of that. That never happened. It's not true. And maybe that's comforting. Or maybe your friends are like, yeah, well, guess what I heard? And they tell you, like, they up the stakes on some even more horrific story. And maybe that helps too, because there's sort of a catharsis in like the what could possibly go wrong. Okay, well, mom and dad being an hour late and me burning dinner is probably not the greatest failure, of my babysitting career to this point. So yeah, that's an excellent point, that we have multiple motivations. We have in-story motivations, and then we have sort of the linguistic, communicative motivations that inspire us to use folklore at any particular communicative moment in our lives. Yeah?
Do we have any idea how much this folklore is being produced by kids and adolescents versus adults?
Yeah, a huge part of it. It is almost entirely, I would say the bulk of it is being produced by young people online. There's a lot of really terrible fan art for all the really good art that shows up of Slender Man. There's just, I think there's a very clear, let me see if I can find it. The Skinny Sally picture that I had posted is, I think, wonderfully evocative, but clearly not professional. Is it not coming up? Why? Resume slideshow. Come on. Do it. Do it. Do it. Do it. It's not doing it. Never mind. I'll show it to you later. But yeah, that very clearly amateur drawing looks like maybe it was done by a younger person, something like that. There's a lot of stuff like that. And there's really a lot of terrible, terrible fiction written out there. And I don't mean terrible in a usefulness as a cultural form of expression, but terrible in like a literary sense, just like really badly written stuff. But it's people working it out. And as if any of you are involved in any fan communities online, a big function of those communities is to help each other out, to become better writers, to become better artists, to develop and hone their ideas and stuff like that. So there's actually a lot of support and growth that comes out of these things. But yeah, a huge amount of this content is happening online and with young people, and a huge part of it's happening offline as well. A lot of folklorists who are studying Slender Man now are studying him in oral tradition. situations where online is no longer the issue. The whole study of slender sickness, this feeling that you get when Slender Man is near you or upon you, is something that is sometimes discussed online but doesn't manifest online at all. It just manifests. I mean, if you can ask young people now if they've heard of Slender Man, they'll say yes. And if you ask if you've seen him online, they'll be like, what? Because they're just hearing about him word of mouth. So this is already charging ahead much faster than we can keep track of easily. Andrea.
Do you know, Lynn, what the impact was of this murder? Has it made the legend even more
Yeah, generally.
provocative, or has it, made people look at it with more skepticism?
Both in a weird way. I mean, legends are really hard to keep down on the folkloric level. A lot of people immediately turned a very, very angry eye towards creepypasta. I just finished editing a book about Slender Man that will be coming out in the next few months, which is very exciting. And one of the contributors to that wrote about the sort of stigma of participating in Slender Man culture online. I mean, first of all, when the stabbing happened, the community in the Something Awful forums actually got together and had some really poignant and emotional conversations with each other about, like, is this our fault? Did we somehow set this idea loose on the world and then this happened with it? And I think the general thinking on that is no. Both young girls now, update on the trial, have been found mentally ill, and so they will be going to institutions rather than to prison, which is probably better. But if you look at the sort of fantasy lives that they were leading when they chose to stab their friend, they were also having active conversations with Lord Voldemort and other literary characters as well. So there's a sense that even if Slender Man had never been born, these two girls would probably have done something like this anyway, which is unfortunate. So that was sort of a big scrutiny. For those of you who are into like dressing up and going to Comic-Con, Slender Man is a very popular costume that people can create. People like to dress up as Slender Man and hang out. And the media almost immediately chose to vilify this as a practice. Why would anyone want to do this? Which was very colored by the instance that happened. I mean, we all dress up as Freddy Krueger, and that's okay. Nobody knows who Freddy Krueger is anymore. We dress up as fill-in-the-blank movie bad guy. Jigsaw. How old am I, you guys? But so we dress up as scary movie characters all the time, and that's sort of considered normal. So there was sort of an inherent, scrutiny on creepypasta. This is bad. This is evil. This is, what D&D was a long time ago. This is the thing that's corrupting our children. And of course, all that did was make it immediately way more popular, and people started Googling Slender Man and finding all of this stuff. And I've had students write papers being like, did you know that Slender Man comes from the 16th century German character called Der Grossmann? And I'm like, strike one. But it is, it's convincing stuff. And so it has promoted it, I think, more, given maybe some people a nuanced view of it, but not necessarily. So, yeah.
Do you find that regionally, like in the States, that certain legends exist more than in other areas? Because I've never heard of Slender Man until I took your class.
Wow, interesting. I'm doing my part.
I didn't grow up with that, but I grew up with like Bigfoot because we live like near mountains.
Mm-hmm.
It's much in lots of fields and stuff. That's more plausible.
Yeah.
In our area, so do you find that like different legends fit different communities?
Yeah, and in general, yes, different legends fit different communities, and we see sort of different, to use a folklore term that my students will recognize, different ecotypes of legends, right? Just as plants become typified to different climates, so do legends. If you live in the woods, you're going to have Bigfoot. If you're in Florida, you're going to call him a skunk ape. If you live in the Himalayas, you're going to call him a Yeti. So we do absolutely see that. I don't know that there's necessarily regional distribution based on landscape of Slender Man, because he tends to exist largely online or in sort of those ambiguous moments when you sort of start to feel creeped out. There's one of the most popular beliefs about Slender Man is that if you suddenly think of him for no reason, it's because he's standing behind you. I guest edited a special issue of the journal Contemporary Legend about Slender Man, and we actually, this was our little Easter egg, the first word of each chapter in the book make the sentence, "He's standing right behind you." And it was really, so we had to tell our authors, we had to be like, you have to figure out a way to start your essay with standing. She did. It was awesome. So yeah, that we sort of get those little tropes that can bring him anywhere, right? So he doesn't need to, I mean, again, we go back to that sort of surveillance culture interpretation. Slender Man isn't limited to where he can be. He sort of has that corporate reach into everywhere. Yeah.
I kind of get the feeling that Slender Man isn't necessarily like restricted to certain geographic areas, but more often to specific groups of people. A lot of times the people who knew about Slender Man are like sort of those types of like legends and things where we're often like nerds, like the nerd community that I was in, or like
More often nerds.
you know,
Yeah.
more introverted groups of people, or people who spent a lot more time on the internet
Mhm.
and things like that. Whereas people who were, I mean, stereotypically like jocks and people who were at my school who didn't really spend very much time on the internet really didn't have any idea. So it was kind of this little like, kind of
Yeah.
gem of like legends and things that there was kind of like in your little group of friends, everyone knew about it, and it was kind of
Yeah.
something you had separate from everyone else.
Yeah, and it was certainly initially at the beginning much more of a niche sort of phenomenon. It was limited to people who had encountered that sort of content, creepypasta in general, online. The Wisconsin stabbings clearly sort of blew that one open, so that suddenly a lot of people were finding these sort of niche communities online and seeing what they had in them. And I think that's a really good articulation too of how we perceive these things. Legends can happen on this big scale, but we experience them in and among our group of friends. I mean, it's sort of that shock you feel when you discover that all your other friends played MASH in elementary school too. You know, you'd write MASH, mansion, apartment, shack, house. You know, and you'd go like that discovery that people literally across the country were all doing that, and that yet that is, for most of us, an intense memory with our friend circle. And so that's sort of a nice example of folklore, how it can be really broad reaching, but it's experienced on this really sort of intimate, personal level. Are we out of time?
We have 1 minute. Is there anything about your research that has scared you?
Oh yeah, that Jeff the Killer picture. I mean, I when I teach folk narrative, I have my students go out and find creepypasta and post it and share with each other and sort of find those legend elements within those stories. And oh my gosh, I have way accidentally, I'll be up, it's like late at night, I'm on the couch, I'm all alone, I'm just reading through these stories, and then I just am awake until 5 a.m. with the dog and all the lights on in the bedroom, like, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. But yeah, I think that for me, probably the most compelling thing, one, is that these aren't just stories that we tell, they're stories that we embody and that we do, and then that sense of what makes something real anyway? I mean, so setting the tulpa effect aside, if people believe in Slender Man, then he's there. His effect is being had. There's a real visible manifestation in the world of that belief system. So might as well be real. I know. I know.
You have to be mentally stable to go into your field, don't you?
Yikes, that sets up a disturbing precedent for for folklore studies, but sure. No, we'll just cross your fingers that all the folklorists you know are mentally stable, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.